So we move without much ado, and we have the pleasure and the honor to have with us on my left President Barroso of the Commission of the European Union, and on my right Tony Barber, the Europe editor of the Financial Times. And in the next little less than 1 hour, we're going to try and pack 10 years of your presidency. Looking back, and maybe the first question I can ask you, so let's hear what was your best moment as president in the last 10 years and your worst moment as president in the last 10 years.
First of all, I'm not the best person to judge, but what I can tell you is the moment where I had more emotion. It does not mean that was my best moment in terms of my action, but for me the moment that I recall most strongly was the moment I, together with my colleague of the European Council, delivered the acceptance speech of the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. It's something that you can never forget. The recognition made of the great contribution that the European Union has given and is giving to peace. That was the moment I recall with more emotion. The worst moment, I leave it for you to decide, but there are so many moments that I would prefer not to happen. But there were some difficult moments. Once again, from an emotional point of view, they were linked to during what was called the Euro crisis, the need to support countries in difficulty, namely Greece. But I have to say very honestly that my biggest emotion was when I saw the difficulties in my own country, in Portugal, and the difficulties that we need to change, we need to overcome, finally to get a program adopted, and afterwards, of course, for that program to be successful. These were my most difficult moments, but I'm not going to compare now in terms of performance. That's up to you to decide. But in terms of the most difficult and the most happy moment, I think these are probably the ones.
I know we have to live with our decisions, but there must be at least one decision where, looking back over the 10 years, you think, maybe I should have decided differently. Maybe I should have taken a different course of action.
Look, I think basically the European Commission decided rightly. That's the truth. And we have, when we make an analysis of the decisions, we have to analyze the decisions at the time they were taken. I think it is not right or fair to analyze decisions retroactively, either the good or the bad decisions. Because we have to analyze decisions with the information that we had at the time. And basically, the European Commission took the right decisions. My 2 mandates were marked by 2 big crises. The constitutional crisis, non-ratification of the Lisbon Treaty, and we solved it through the non-ratification of the Constitutional Treaty, and we solved it with the ratification of the Lisbon Treaty. Basically, it is solved. The second mandate was marked by the financial crisis that did not start in Europe, but it was the biggest stress test ever for Europe, integration. And basically, the existential crisis of the euro, I think we can say it's solved now. No complacency, some problems remain, and we know the difficulties also that exist mainly in social terms, but the reality is that those observers, those analysts in Europe and outside of Europe that were predicting the Greek exit, they were predicting the implosion of the euro, even disintegration of Europe, they were completely wrong. They are the ones who have to apologize for their analysis, not the European Commission. The European Commission has always said, we are going to keep that line, we believe Greece should not exit, we believe that the euro should remain united, we should come with a banking union. The first time I used the word banking union, I was very much attacked by governments and by critics, by other kind of critics, because they said, oh, the more we can have some kind of framework for financial stability, but don't speak about banking union. And now we have not perfect, because in Europe nothing is perfect. Europe is always a process, a work in progress, but we have a banking union. So I believe that the European Commission has basically taken the right decisions, but you know very well that in Europe, and this is not a way to escape our responsibility, it is not the Commission that takes the final decisions, except in competition and some other areas. The decisions are taken by the Member States and by the European Parliament. This is the area. So what we have to see is, did the Commission put the right proposals forward or not? And we have. Some of them were not approved because there were not yet political conditions at national level to be approved. But I really believe that our basic decisions to overcome the constitutional crisis, when, for instance, I proposed, because there was a blockage at that moment, I proposed the Berlin Declaration to try to get a new consensus on something that was keeping basically the same elements of the constitutional treaty, but will not be a constitution as such. That was the right decision. And afterwards we could get all the member states on board. And at the moment there were difficulties, if you remember, not only with Britain, but also with the Czech Republic or with Poland, for instance. And they were solved. And regarding the financial crisis, also, we were very close to a disaster. Not only for the countries in the program, this country, Italy, we are very close to the abyss. I remember the G20 in France, where there was a tendency or the attempt of some to put Italy under the direct supervision of the IMF. It will be a disaster. We were almost alone saying this should not happen. By the way, President Obama understood that we were right, because at that moment President Obama came also in our meetings and he made a crash course in the euro and euro policies. But there were some people that believed the best way is to put Italy directly under the IMF tutel. It will be a mistake, because it will only endanger the situation in the euro area, because the day the crisis could come to Spain as it came, but only on the banking sector, and afterwards to Italy, it will be in fact a problem for the whole euro area. So I really believe that in retrospect we can say the European Commission has broadly taken the good initiatives, and today we have a European Commission that has more competence than before. We did not ask those competences for ourselves, but we have, because the member states have recognized that at least for the euro area we need more integration. The European Commission and the European institutions today have competence that were unimaginable some time before the crisis. The European Central Bank making the supervision of all the banks in the euro area. I mean, the biggest federalists could not dream of this some years before. The European Commission making the assessment ex ante of the national budget. So it shows that, contrary to what is sometimes conventional wisdom, the European Union has made steps forward and not backwards.
So you've divided your presidency into two phases, broadly speaking. One that dealt with the constitutional crisis, and the second, the financial crisis. Let's take you back to those early years when the question of the EU constitutional treaty was under discussion. As we know, it failed largely because of the two referendums in France and the Netherlands. In retrospect, do you think that if the EU had passed that constitutional treaty, it would have made any difference at all to the events of your second term and the ability of the EU to deal with the financial crisis? Or in the end, was the constitutional treaty not that important one way or the other?
It's very difficult, you know, from an intellectual point of view, to make hypothetical retroactive judgments. I don't like that kind of exercise. Of course, you are free to do it, because they are not only hypothetical, but they are retroactive. Sometimes you use the popular expression, if my grandmother had not died, she would be still alive. That's obvious. So what would happen if the the Constitutional Treaty had been approved? I really believe that intellectually we don't have the tools to have an honest answer to this. I tend to think that the problem in Europe is not so much institutional. Yesterday, I delivered, for those who have not the opportunity yet to read it, I delivered a programmatic speech at Humboldt University. And I say basically that the real problem in Europe is a political one. And that before discussing the polity, the system, we should discuss the politics and the policies, and to find a new consensus on the politics. This is the issue. To have an agreement between all of us, the institutions, but the member states as well, and the most important political forces on what we want to do together and what we do not want to do together. So I tend to agree that the treaties are not so important at all as people pretend. And the idea that we should always be discussing institutional engineering, I have to say that no institutional engineering will solve the problem of the political will. No institutional engineering. But of course treaties have consequences, and non-ratification had consequences that increased the Euro-pessimism trend. You see? So I cannot say it was without consequence, it had consequences. But my honest answer is we don't know what will happen if the constitutional treaty. I believe the problems of Europe are far deeper than the institutional or legal matters. They have to do with political will, political leadership, the need of ownership of the project. And now, based on this experience of 10 years in the Commission, and not only in the Commission, in my national capacity, where I was 12 years in my national government, including Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, I can tell you that the real issue in Europe is a political one of the leaders of Europe, and by Europe I mean also the governments, not only the Brussels or Strasbourg, understanding that they are the stakeholders of this project, that they cannot devalue their own society, their own community. They have to defend it and not leave the initiative of the debate to the extremes, and they should come and forward. They should leave their comfort zone, and they should engage so that if there are problems in Europe, we can correct them, because of course not everything Europe does is perfect.
Now when you took over, the EU had just undergone its grand enlargement from 15 to 25 countries, which subsequently in 2007 became 27, and last year 28. Now that must have made an enormous difference to the way the Commission, the College of Commissioners, the 28 around the table, dealt with their business. Did you have to get a larger table, for example? I mean,
Yes.
how easy was it to organize a discussion when suddenly the group has doubled in size?
Yeah, of course.
And maybe to add to that, and would you advocate for the future reduction of the Commission?
Yeah. So, first of all, it was, of course, my commission was the first, even if some commissioners have come already in the last moments of the Prodi Commission. It was the real first commission to have this responsibility of the broader, large Europe, 25. By the way, one good example of what happened in these years is that now we are 28. And the Euro area, we are not less, we are more, with Latvia joining. We are 18, and probably Lithuania next year, 19. So, once again, showing that the critics were not right. Now, I cannot compare how the Commission was before my own Commission, the first in 2004, but I can compare the European Union. Because already in 87 I was in the Council. And in 92 I was member of the European Council, because at that time the foreign ministers were member of the European Council. So I remember well, because I was one of those around the table, the European Union with 12 members. At that time it was Jacques Delors, the President of the Commission, Helmut Kohl, François Mitterrand, Felipe González, and many others. And so the logic, the dynamics have changed dramatically. Namely, the Council lost importance, and now the importance went to the European Council. The European Union became what in German people call Chefsache. That was a very important evolution. And the European Parliament has incomparably more powers than before. Now, it is a mistake that I think many analysts make, thinking in terms of zero-sum game between institutions. That does not mean that the Commission lost influence. On the contrary, the Commission today has more competence than before. Having said this, to manage the Commission, I think we have succeeded. And there are many already now, not many, but several academic studies comparing the capacity of decision of these two commissions with 27, 28, with before, and we see that decisions are taken as effectively or even more effective than before. I think the number is not the issue. The issue with the Commission is the institutional culture and the management capabilities. I had to make some changes in terms of management, reinforce the center, of course. The President of the Commission is a guarantor of collegiality. If we don't, and by the way, the Lisbon Treaty reinforced the role of the President compared to other treaties. Because if not, the silo mentality of the Commission, that is, of course, a risk because of the very strong administration, could develop further. So we need a strong center. But basically, we can say that the decision, that's why, for instance, I have systematically tried to take the decisions in the Commission by consensus. In those 10 years, almost all the decisions, probably two or three, not two, I think, were not by consensus. They required a vote. Why? Because from the beginning, I was very sensible to the risk of having a fragmented Commission along regional lines, the new members against the others, for instance, or ideological lines. The European Commission should be political but not partisan. It's very important for the debate now. If the Commission is too politicized, it loses credibility in many areas where the Commission is also very important, where the Commission has what we could call quasi-jurisdictional role, for instance in competition and in other matters. So for the credibility and the authority of the Commission, and we have seen that credibility and authority has been increasing, for instance the Commission, when there was a problem with rule of law in some of our member states, the member states looked at the Commission to follow the opinion of the Commission. And even the governments of those countries said, we will not follow the criticism that other governments made. They say, we will follow the position of the Commission. So the Commission has gained authority, for instance, to deal with rule of law problems in some of our member states. This is why the Commission has to avoid to be too partisan. Political, yes, but too partisan. So that's why I've tried in my two colleges, of course, to have people discussing. We have débat d'orientation, we have political differences, but at the end, to try to have a common position that everybody takes responsibility of. If not, the European Commission becomes a mini parliament. And I have the greatest respect of parliaments, but we are an executive, we are not a parliament.
But President, tonight in this room, we will have 4 candidates who see themselves as candidates for the presidency, and they are going to be saying to this audience, vote for me because I'm a Christian Democrat, I'm an EPP, vote for me because I'm a socialist. In other words, almost the opposite message to what you've just said. We have to be political and we have to be partisan. You should vote for me because of my partisan politics.
Yes, and this is a step in the direction of a more Europeanized elections. Because as we know, the European Parliament elections have been used namely for national purposes. Most people think only nationally when they vote. By the way, it's typically the election where people can sanction the government without necessarily replacing him. And there are many analyses, and you know them very well, Professor Weiler, about this. So I think that the candidates present a program. It's a contribution to structure political parties at European level that we don't have today. The reality is that our political parties at European level are not yet like political parties at national level, making the articulation of interests, aggregation of demands, and the political representation. It's very common to see a political party saying one thing in the parliament in Strasbourg and almost the opposite, if not the opposite, back home. So it's very common. So this is a way of having more structured political system, because the European democracy is a polity in the making. If you want an image, it's like a scaffold. It's not perfect building. We should avoid this esprit de système when you look at Europe. It's a scaffold, and it will remain a scaffold. It will be always work in progress. I think the building behind it is beautiful, but we cannot see it immediately. And this is why we have to understand that we have to respect the national democracies, but we are making a European democracy at the same time. Having said this, the new Commission, whoever wins the election, will be a gross coalition, to use the German name, a great coalition. In my Commission, I had EPP, so center-right, let's call it like that, liberals and socialists. There was no difference. I made no difference about my colleagues, I can tell you. A Commission President should seem, this party should be the party of Europe. Because if not, he loses the authority to make the body work. Now, having said this, of course, it's important that the different political parties, namely for the Parliament, they structure their positions, and of course, since the Commission is accountable to the Parliament, there is some degree of politicization, but I repeat, a more political Commission should not mean a more partisan Commission. That will be a mistake, at least in this level of European integration.
Now, during your 10 years as Commission President, and particularly since the onset of the financial crisis 6 years ago, one opinion poll after another has shown declining levels of public trust, both in politicians at national level, but also in EU institutions and the leadership at those institutions. Do you think that you or your Commission bears any responsibility for these declining levels of trust?
Of course, we all have that responsibility, but it has to be shared. And we have to analyze what are the responsibilities of all the actors. The reality is, first of all, that the low support to the European institutions today is not just to the European institutions, it is national institutions. According to all the surveys of public opinion, for instance, in this country, there is more support to the European institutions than to the national government or to the national parties. Recently, there was a sondage in France showing that there is more support to the European Union than to the parliament of that country. And it's different. Some countries, the Nordic countries, is different. But generally speaking, what exists in Europe, and the people should understand that, if not, they are going to repeat the argument of the Eurosceptics or the Europhobes. There is a angst, there is a situation where the common person, the man or woman in the street, believes that the leaders, they are not delivering, they are not able to solve their problems. And they turn against the governments, against the parties, and they turn against the European Union. And they turn even more against the European Union when we have very often national politicians that when things go well, they say it's their merit, when things go wrong, they say it's fault of Brussels. And this is very typical in our political system. That's why I've been arguing consistently for the ownership of the process by all the leaders, not only by Brussels or Strasbourg. Because if not, we have to understand that European institutions alone, they will not be able to establish this direct link, because our system is by definition a very complex system. It is a democracy in the making above 28 national democracies. This is why the ownership of the project is so important. So certainly we have some responsibilities, but look, most of those decisions are national responsibility. Bailouts. We made proposals. From the beginning, the European Commission, for instance, proposed the European Financial Stability Mechanism, a fully integrated mechanism. But the member states said, not only Germany or not only Britain, most of them said, no question about having a common instrument for that. It has to be national loans, because it's a huge amount of money. We have to respect that. So, because of the magnitude of the financial needs, the member states, they came naturally in the forefront. But they have, so they have basically that responsibility. Having said this, the Commission and the other European institutions, namely the European Central Bank, have been making the proposal, for instance, the banking union. I remember when I spoke first about banking union, People criticized, saying, as I've told you before, the more we can get is a framework for financial stability. In fact, it was an idea that came from the Commission, when I've asked, between my two commissions, Jacques Larosière to make a report. And then we made a test with the member states, and their first reaction was no banking union, because of sovereignty. And now we have a banking union. So I think we have to be clear about what is the responsibility of the national level and European level. If not, we will make life easier for the Eurosceptics, and it's a mistake when the mainstream forces from the center left or the center right put the blame on Brussels. I'm not saying that to escape any kind of responsibility, because of course, I've said it, we all share that responsibility. But we have to know, employment policy is mainly a national responsibility. Only now, the European Commission has the possibility, through national recommendations, to make some proposals there. But the instruments of employment policy, reform of the labor market, it's a national responsibility. So you can put the blame on Brussels, but I think it's at least not intellectually honest, because these are reforms that are done or not done at national level. And I could multiply the examples. Yes, we all share a responsibility, but I really believe the reasons why we're not faster, the reasons why we are not bolder, were not because of the European institutions, but they were because there were naturally different positions among our member states, and we have to respect that.
When you were Prime Minister of Portugal, did you ever put the blame on Brussels?
No, because I was I have my arguments with Brussels. I could, and I've discussed, and I've insisted, but I have never public, and you can check the records, said we are in this situation because of Europe. Because I was, before being President of the Commission, a very committed European. And I believe it's really a mistake, a huge mistake, that some national leaders do, putting the blame on Brussels. As I said once to a former president, if you criticize Brussels from Monday to Saturday, you cannot get the people to vote for the European Union on Sunday. I can tell you, I said this to Jacques Chirac before the referendum, constitutional treaty. When, because of the Bolkestein Directive, the line he was following was criticizing every day the European Union. Of course, if the main leaders from the center right or from the center left criticize every day the European Union, when there is a referendum, what do they expect? People vote against. And this is the problem, the appeal I make today. I have made it publicly also before. We need a kind of a new consensus for Europe. We need the leadership at national level. Because, of course, with different perspectives. I don't mean that all have to follow the same line. And of course they can criticize the European institutions. Like any political body, we should scrutinize all the institutions. But we are living very exceptional times. Some of the old demons of Europe are there. We see, and there is one thing in common between all those political forces. Those who claim protectionism, those who are against migrants, foreigners, those who are against globalization, those who are against free trade, those who are against internal market, there is always one thing in common. They are against the European Union. I'm not saying that all those that are against the European Union are extremists or are fascists or whatever. No. But what I'm saying is that those who are against these things, positive values, are against the European Union. So we have to defend the European Union as a very precious thing. And that requires exceptional leadership at European and at national level.
President, one of the big things that happened during your 10 years was the consolidation of the position of the High Rep, the Foreign Action Service, and that created an expectation of a more robust role for Europe in the world, etc. Has it lived up to your expectations? Would you say, for example, that the reaction of the European Union to the Ukraine crisis has been adequate?
Yeah. Once again, we have to discuss the institutional from the political. I think it was a progress to have the External Action Service and to have the High Representative that is at the same time Vice President of the Commission. For instance, the Kosovo issue. where there was possible to have an agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. It was possible because of the very good work of Cassie Ashton and her team, but also because she was in a position that she could offer them what they wanted, that is the perspective of enlargement. So the fact that we have a kind of a foreign minister that can speak on behalf of the countries of Europe, she is the president of the Council of Foreign Affairs and the Council of Defense Ministers. And at the same time, as Vice President of the Commission, I think is institutionally a progress. But once again, to speak on behalf of the governments, she has to have the support of the governments. And so we cannot ask the High Representative to make miracles. And there are some issues where we know the different governments have different positions. So once again, don't put the blame on the institution when the governments are not able, because of different perceptions or because of different interests, to act together. Now, coming to the issue of Ukraine, when you spoke about the two crises, my presidency, I think that all the critics agree. These have been the most difficult times since the beginning of European integration. Not all the constitutional crisis, but mainly the financial crisis. And now that we are trying to have some rest, Mr. Putin decided to create another crisis. So, and this is also an important issue to consider. This, I believe, is the biggest threat to our security in Europe since at least the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Iron Curtain. We know, of course, we remember well what happened in the Balkans, but the potential for destabilization of this crisis is much wider than the Balkans. That's my analysis. Now, Europe basically has taken a coherent position. It is to support Ukraine, to show to Mr. Putin that Ukraine can be a viable state, a sovereign state, a stable, if possible, a democracy and prosperous country. This is the first line. The second one is to show that the behavior of the Russian authorities has to have some consequences. And there, it's work in progress as well, because it's a difficult issue for member states to agree on these kind of measures. But basically, I think so far, the European Union has taken good decisions. Now, would you like, as I would, to have a more robust position, to have more coherence, to have more mobilization of means? Of course. But that does not depend on the capacities of the High Representative. That depends on the capacity, on the willingness of our member states. And the reality is that the member states, while they are united in the condemnation of the Russian behavior, and there is no doubts about it, and that's good, they do not always agree in all the terms of the response. And this, let's be honest, this is the issue. So I think we have to have a balanced, not black or white response to your question. But I believe basically that the creation of the External Action Service and that the fusion of competencies is a step in the right direction for a more Europeanized foreign policy. But as you know, foreign policy is by definition one of those fields where the governments are more reluctant in sharing their sovereignty.
Now, you, more than most European leaders of the last 10 years, have met President Putin many, many times. When do you think his foreign policy hardened in this way? When did you first detect signs of a much tougher approach? Was it after his re-election as president in 2012, or did you see something happening even before that?
Now you are putting me real difficult questions, but I will answer. In fact, President Putin is probably the leader outside the European Union that I've met the most, more than 20 times. And I've spoken with him, namely during that Ukrainian gas crisis, almost 30 times by phone. So I think I know relatively well, politically, not personally, but I know relatively well President Putin. My opinion is that there is a change in his behavior, and the change has a very interesting cause. He became more active in foreign policy more assertive, not to say more confrontational, exactly when he was losing support internally. After his re-election, he understood that his power should be taken for granted. And then he became more assertive. And Ukraine is a very interesting example for this. Let's not forget one thing. The Russia position on Ukraine was that they were opposed Ukraine joining NATO, but it was never that they were opposing Ukraine joining the European Union. In fact, they are on record saying that Ukraine, if Ukraine wants, can join the European Union. So they have moved the goalposts. And then, when Ukraine wanted to sign an association agreement with the European Union, an association agreement that included a free trade agreement, they did not accept that. Because Ukraine, even with Yanukovych, Ukraine wanted to have the association agreement with us. Make no mistake. I also spoke very often with Yanukovych. But they could not because of Russian pressure. They have initialed the agreement. The agreement was negotiated by five years, so everybody was aware, including the Russians, of the content. And by the way, contrary to what they are saying, they were kept informed about the agreement. But at a certain moment, they decided not to do it. Why? Because President Putin has a project, and he did not hide it. I spoke about that project with him very often. His project is to have a customs union, that today there are 2 members already, Kazakhstan and Belarus, but he wants to build on that, enlarge it, to become an Euro-Asian Union, a kind of a pole of power opposed to the European Union, unfortunately. His goal is Ukraine. It's not so much Uzbekistan, it's Ukraine. For political, historic, cultural reasons, the reality is that in Moscow, many people did not yet fully accept the independence of Ukraine. What I'm telling you is not my opinion. It's what I understood perfectly well from what President Putin told me. And probably it's too soon to write my memoir, but I will produce later more elements about this. The reality is that they have not accepted, intellectually and even emotionally, that Ukraine is an independent country. So the objective of Putin was not Crimea. The objective of Putin is to have some kind of hegemony or control over Ukraine. I'm not saying necessarily incorporating full Ukraine, but Ukraine means a lot for Russia. This is the reality. And that's why they took that position. And of course, that conflict erupted. They were not expecting, because it's difficult for some people in Moscow to understand, that the people of Ukraine, they have their own opinion. And those popular movements were spontaneous. I think many people in the Kremlin believe that it was the United States or some Europeans that were behind it. It was not. At least if it was, I should have known. It was the people of Ukraine that did not accept the opposition of Russia today becoming closer to the European Union, because the young people of Ukraine, not only the young, but they want, most of them, I'm not saying everybody, but most of them, they want to have the life that people have in Germany or even in Poland. When Poland joined the European Union, the GDP per capita of Poland were more or less the GDP of per capita of Ukraine. Now it's 3 times more. Of course, the Ukrainians know this. They want to come this way. But the Russian leadership did not let them do that. So this is a very important challenge. And I believe that President Putin is, of course, playing very hard. I think there is still a chance for diplomacy. The European Union is defending this, keep the road open for this, to show that the consequences are going to be high for Russia. We have been doing everything we can during all these years to engage positively with Russia, because as you see, there is no interest from a European point of view. We are by far their biggest partner. There is no interest from a European point of view to have a conflict with Russia, to come to a logic of a new Cold War, but in fact they took decisions that make it very difficult. So let's see now, after the last statements he has made that were, I think, aimed at the de-escalated situation, let's see if he follows through and if there is some hope for a political solution and not for this logic of confrontation that will be certainly not good for us, but it will certainly be very bad for Russia, because Russia will become more isolated in the world.
We have to be thinking of drawing this to a close, but I can't resist the following. So, you now have experience as 10 years of President of the Commission, so I really want to focus on the role of the President of the Commission rather than the role of the Commission. And if you had to give one single most important piece of advice to your successor, what would that be?
Successors don't like opinions of predecessors. But my advice, if he asks me, he or she asks me, is very clear. Physical resistance and psychological resistance.
Last question next.
And of course, a passion for Europe, but that I take it for granted, that someone who is running for President of the Commission has a passion for Europe. But the work of a President of the Commission, I think it was Chris Patton that said that it's probably the most difficult job in the world. The amount of work, of travel, of hours to follow, I mean, it's simply not imaginable. So it requires, even if you can be a little bit fat, it requires a good, let's say, physical endurance. That is the first condition. The second is patience, psychological condition. Running the Commission itself is a challenge, but it has been done. But the complexity of the relations, not only the European Council and the Council, but with the Parliament, that is becoming much more assertive, is certainly a big, big challenge. So I hope that the next President of the Commission will have that patience. And of course, with the political will, I think problems will be solved. But once again, I want to make the point. We should not expect miracles. The Commission on its own, the Commission is and remains a central institution. And the fact that we are so many now, 28, the Commission is even more a focal point in European decision. Because don't forget that for the new member states, the Commission was their partner, the institution they know better. And so the Commission has a very important role that sometimes people are not aware of, linking all the member states. Because when we discuss in the international analysts or commentators, they look of course to France, to Germany, to Britain, to Italy. But Europe is 28 countries. There has to be an institution that has not that horizontal view of the situation, a panoramic view, and also what I could call a vertical competence in terms of expertise in European policies. This only the Commission has. The Council has extremely good people, the Parliament certainly as well. But the Parliament is mainly among political lines, and the Council is among national lines, by definition. When I was Prime Minister, I know I can be committed European, but my first interest is to defend the national interest, naturally. We cannot blame the governments for defending what they believe is their interest. So while the Council is divided along national lines, while the Parliament is divided along ideological lines, the Commission tries to make an interpretation of the general common interest. That is why this institution is so precious. And I think it will be a mistake to weaken that institution. And in fact, the paradox, an interesting thing, was that during these years, even when the member states were not ready to go on an integration way, but they have to done it intergovernmentally, for instance, the fiscal treaty, that was signed by all except Britain and Czech Republic. Now the Czech Republic is joining. But the governments did not want at the beginning to give it to the Commission, but at the end to the kind of monitoring. But at the end they understood that the only way to make it work will be the Commission and the European Court of Justice. I can tell you based on my experience of 10 years, if it was not the Commission, and of course the European Court of Justice, we would no longer have the internal market in Europe. And I'm measuring my words. During the financial crisis, the temptation of nationalism, the temptation to renationalize policies, for each government to do its way, for instance, the way they were dealing with the banks, was immense. And even the most traditionally friends of the competition competencies of the Commission, of the internal market, because they had to make unorthodox measures supporting their banks, they were not supporting the European Union. That's why the Commission is so critically important if you want a Europe that is fair. Because we have to have a referee. The referee is not popular. Like if you watch a match of football, usually the referee does not get a lot of applause. But without a good referee, there is even the best players in the world, like Cristiano Ronaldo, if I may say so, they cannot deliver. We need a strong referee at European level, not only a referee, someone who comes with proposals. That's why I really believe that the President of the Commission has that responsibility, and I'm sure the new President will keep this tradition, this culture of an institution that is not there to serve specific interests of governments, but to serve the general European interest. We had a lot of fights. One of the reasons that the European Commission is not so popular is that because we have a lot of fights, and the communication in Europe, Financial Times probably is an exception, but the communication in Europe is basically national. So when there is a conflict between the Commission and the French government, or the German government, or the British government, of course that does not make the Commission popular. But at the same time, the leaders and the public, the informed public, they should understand that it's in their interest to have this kind of independent institution.
President, we have to also be fair to Mr. Monti and Mr. de Gucht who are coming
Oh,
after
I'm
us.
sorry.
So
That's good. I see that.
I want to thank you very much on behalf of all our audience. I want to thank you in a modest way on behalf of many, many Europeans for your 10 years as President. And I'm not sure what your plans are for the future, but whatever they are, I wish you great success and satisfaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you.